So does it sometimes feel like your story is just moving too slow? Like the scenes just drag on and nothing's really happening? Are you worried that you're boring your reader a little bit? Well, today we are going to talk about pacing. This is something that I get a lot of questions about, and I'm probably going to do a whole series on it. I'm going to give you 4 hacks today, 4 different things you can do to try and speed up your story or at least keep it moving along at a decent clip so that you don't lose your reader. Okay? Stay tuned. Do you yearn to make your living from writing fiction? Do you struggle to finish your manuscript due to block, indecision, or lack of confidence in your story? Have you already published books that just aren't getting the sales you'd like? The truth is, the thing that really makes a difference in book sales is not currently being taught in the fiction author space. And it comes from the story level, not the marketing level. Real talk, if you don't get it right at the story level, no amount of awesome marketing is going to make your book a bestseller. Hi, I'm Liesl. I've got 20 fiction books, 4 genres, the USA Today bestseller accolade, and multiple award wins under my belt. So, obviously I've been around the block a few times. I have a lot of readers that follow me from genre to genre, even though conventional wisdom says that's rare. Why? Because my readers know that I know how to tell a story that's going to make them feel something. And if you can master that skill, you can write anything you want for the rest of your life and know it will be well received by readers, which means better reviews, more gushing, more mega fans, and best of all, more royalties for you. Grab your fuzzy slippers and your chocolate of choice. I'm going to teach you how to emotionally engineer your story into the hearts and minds of your readers on purpose. Let's go. Okay, so maybe you are someone who feels like your story is too slow, you're worried that it's boring, you're worried that it's not moving along, there's not enough happening quickly enough, that sort of thing. It is a common problem when you're first starting out and getting used to pacing. In order to fix this, maybe you've done things like cutting out some of the description or introspection of the characters. Maybe you've jumped into action to try and just make things feel a little bit more exciting and sped up, or maybe you've even rushed through some of the emotional moments in order to get to the moments that you think will interest the reader more. Well, unfortunately, none of those things are going to work. In fact, they're just going to jack up your pacing even more. Cutting description and especially introspection from the characters, cutting out character thoughts, is going to make the scenes feel really hollow. Jumping into action, we're going to talk about that specifically because it's what most people do in order to fix what they feel like is slow pacing, but it actually cheapens what's going on in the story, and you're going to lose your reader really quickly doing that. And in terms of rushing through key moments, that is the worst thing you could do. We're going to talk about key emotional moments and how they are tied up in pacing, what role they play in pacing, and it's a really important one, okay? So here's the thing about pacing. I've always gotten a lot of questions about pacing. How do I do pacing? How do I know how fast to go? How do I know how slow to go? That sort of thing. And in the past, I didn't always know exactly how to answer it. And I didn't even know why I didn't know. I couldn't really articulate it all the time when I was first starting to teach this, because it always just seemed to me that pacing is something that you learn through experience as you go along. And that's true, but now that I've learned to teach it a little bit better, we can home in on it a bit. But here's the thing. Pacing is a weird concept because it's actually true that it's not something we can solve directly, okay? It's not like I can say, oh, you're having problems with pacing? Okay, do number 1 this, number 2 this, number 3 this, pacing problem fixed. No, that's not the way it works, right? Getting pacing right is actually a result of getting all the other parts of story right. All right, so you have to have your internal arc dialed in. You have to have the story structure of your plot dialed in. You have to hit all your right beats. You have to have the emotion. That's what I talk about the most. You have to dial in your emotion at every single point. You have to have each scene written really well so that it's emotional, so it's pulling the reader in. Once all of those things are mastered, you will naturally be a master of pacing. But pacing, it's not something you can solve directly, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to give you some hacks today that will help. But just understand that pacing, if you're having trouble pacing, if you feel like your story is going too slow, it's actually because there are other parts of story that you need to master, that you need to practice, okay? I want you to think about it like climbing a mountain. Let's say that you are going to, maybe we should say it's a hike, right? And you're at the very bottom of the trail and you're looking up and you can see the ridge far up in the distance where you're going to try to get to, and that's the end of the hike. Now, unless we are secretly, Clark Kent or some other Marvel or DC superhero, we are not capable of just making it to the summit in one leap, right? And it can be pretty daunting to try and, think about that whole journey that we have ahead of us. So really, in order to make this easier and doable for ourselves, we need to master each part of the journey. We need to master each part of the terrain. We need to focus on each hand and foothold and, just getting over that next rock or around the next bend, And if we do that and just focus on those things, eventually we'll look up and find that we've arrived at our destination, right? And it was just a matter of mastering the little things, and then kind of by default, we're going to master the big things. And pacing is a lot like that, all right? So here's the thing. There are really only two ways to hook your reader. Really, there's only one way, but we're going to start by dividing it into two, okay? The first is action. I said we were going to talk about action. Most authors tend to default to action when it comes to pacing problems, and it's really maybe not the worst thing you could do, but like the second or third worst thing you could do. I understand why people do it. I mean, it's the obvious thing that gets people's attention, right? It is the 3D physical, external, plot-related thing that can really increase interest in what's going on in the story. And then there's the fact that we all read books and watch movies, and we notice that the action scenes tend to catch our attention. So we naturally, when we think, oh, maybe the scene is a little boring, maybe it's a little slow, we default to action and think that's going to solve everything. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't. Do you know why? Action needs to be earned. Did you know that? So in order for us to really be inside an action scene with the character, we need to be invested in them, in who they are, in what they're doing, in what they're trying to accomplish, in what their trials and struggles are, all of that. So this is why, well, one of many reasons why, you should never start your book, like the opening paragraph, with like a fight scene or a heavy action scene, because the reader is not invested enough and they don't care, So it's not a good way to start it. But that's not really the point of my podcast today. Maybe I need to do a whole podcast on this, but you just have to understand that action needs to be earned. So if you're throwing in action into a scene because you think it's too slow and you're using it just to pick up the pace, that's a problem, okay? It's not going to do what you want it to do, and if anything, it's probably going to make things worse. I mean, can action heighten the pacing of a story? Of course it can. But too much of it becomes boring. I mean, think about B movies that have no plot and all action and fight scenes, and you just get bored and fall asleep, And then there's the fact that if it's not relevant, if you're just throwing it in as a Band-Aid for a sluggish scene, it's not earned. And it's going to cheapen what you've written, and it's going to cheapen your characters' emotions and the journey they're going through, and it's just not going to work as a fix, okay? So you have to understand that. There's a time and a place for action, and it can be really fabulous if it's done correctly, but don't default to that as a fix, because it's never going to work as a fix, all right? Let's go on to the second thing that can hook your reader. It's the thing that I talk about all the time that I'm known for. So let's all say it together now. Emotion. And if there is nothing else you take away from today's podcast, let it be this, okay? Emotion is really the only thing that will hook your reader, and people don't understand that. They think hooking the reader is about action. They think it's about intrigue. They think it's about expletives. They think it's about sex. They think it's about all these physical 3D things. But it's really not that that's hooking the reader. It's always the emotion. So I just talked about action, right? Why does action hook the reader? Take more of a high-level view. It's because action creates adrenaline. Adrenaline, and therefore action, falls under the third level of emotions. So remember, I've talked about the 3 levels of emotions before. There's the emotions of the catharsis, which are the deepest level, the second level, which are emotions of the journey, and the third level is emotions of the melodrama, which is sort of scene level emotions, okay? Now, emotions of the melodrama means surface level emotions and physical sensations. Adrenaline is a physical sensation. Therefore, the reason action hooks us is because it causes low-level emotions. And it is the emotion that's hooking us, not the action itself. It's what the action produces within us that hooks us, okay? And that's the same thing with, you could say the same thing about sex. You could say the same thing about drama. You could say the same thing about violence. They create emotional reactions in us, and it is the emotion that hooks us, not what is actually happening on the screen. And of course, what's happening on the screen is the gateway to that, so it's still important. We use those things to create emotion in our reader, but it's just important to know that it's the emotion that hooks the reader, which is why gratuitous action, such as in B movies, right? They don't work because it's not the action itself that's hooking us. It's supposed to be the emotion. And if you just have action, 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 and we don't have a plot and we don't have investment in those characters and we don't have any emotion from those characters, the action stops working. It's not evoking an emotional response in us anymore. So that's how you can tell that it's not the action itself, it's what the action causes, right? So the only real way to hook your reader is through emotion. And you can do that various different ways, action being one of them, right? And understand that when I talk about surface level emotions, superficial, low level emotions, that doesn't mean they're bad by any means. They're just not quite as deep as the emotions of the catharsis. But this is actually kind of the low hanging fruit that you really should be tapping into in your story because they so easily evoke emotion in your reader, right? Okay, so with that in mind, understanding that the real way to hook your reader is through emotion, then if you just kind of follow that thread, what that means is that if your pacing is off, if it feels slow, you're not creating enough emotion in your writing. Now, there's not any one way to fix that. You could use action. You could also use a lot of other things. You could use dialogue. You can use interaction between characters. You can use big events happening. And I'm going to give you 4 hacks now, just very general, high-level things to hopefully apply to your writing and help you maybe get a little bit more of a handle on those scenes that you feel like are running kind of slow. Now, before I go into them, I'm going to do a whole probably series on pacing because pacing is something that you could look at any part of story through the lens of pacing and still have a lot to say about it, right? So I'm going to keep doing these pacing episodes, but I'm going to talk about very specific parts of story moving forward. So just keep an eye out for that. All right, so these hacks. Let's talk about the scene level. When it comes to a scene being slow, usually what I'm hearing people say is that there doesn't seem to be anything happening. It's just not moving fast enough. Things aren't going fast enough, that sort of thing. Keep in mind that your scene always needs to turn. I think most people are pretty familiar with that concept, but in case you're not, it just means that something needs to change in the scene, okay? It's actually not necessarily about a big event. Again, we tend to default to that, but really it means something about the character's circumstances change. So their plans change, their circumstances change, it certainly can be a big event, but it doesn't have to be. Maybe something they believe changes, their level of knowledge changes, meaning they learn something new. I mean, just something has to happen so that from the beginning of the chapter to the end of the chapter, something in the protagonist's world has changed, or whoever the point of view character is that is in that scene. All right, if there's absolutely no change going on, then it's not a scene. It's a part of a scene, okay? You have to have the change. You have to have the scene turn, and that's just a way of saying something in the character's life or circumstances has to be different from the beginning of the scene to the end of the scene. If you are always doing that, then your pacing will automatically be pretty good. The other thing you can do is think about your favorite story structure model. Plot points, hero's journey, virgin's promise, save the cat, whatever it is. What most people don't realize is that story structure is true on every level, okay? So it's true on book level, like beginning to end of book. It's also true on series level, from beginning to end of series. Here's the thing, it's also true on chapter level, okay? The same beats that keep us on track for an entire story are exactly the same to keep us on track for an entire series. And yes, they are exactly the same to keep us on track for a chapter. Now, they're obviously going to be smaller because if you're planning a book, 80,000 word novel, then, each beat, depending on which system you're using, might encompass 2 or 3 chapters or 5 scenes or something like that. And obviously that won't be true if you're just planning a chapter. They're more like micro moments. Literally a single line of dialogue or a single emotion that the character is feeling could qualify as that beat. but you can still use them. And if you do that, you will naturally be using the same things to pull your reader through your scene as you would to pull them through your book. Okay, that's why I really emphasize with my students that they need to understand the nature of story. Okay, not just first do this, second do that, third do that. I mean, that's all good, but most story structure systems, they really focus on the plot. And not that that's a bad thing, but it doesn't tell you the true nature of story. It's like outside looking in rather than inside looking out. And so anyway, I would just recommend very highly that you really learn as much as you can about story structure, but everything that you can apply to your novel at large, you can also apply to an individual chapter or scene. And that will help your pacing in the scene. It will help to make sure that it doesn't drag because you're continually moving through the beats. Okay, so you can try that. All right, so that was hack number 1. Make sure the scene turns, and also you can apply story structure to an individual scene. Now let's talk about the second hack, which is info dumps and reveals. Here's the thing. Anything that you want to reveal, and I'm not talking about the individual fact, but like something you want to reveal by the end of the book, that should all be revealed piecemeal, okay? You never want to info dump. A lot of the times the reason that slow pacing happens and, you know, a chapter or a book gets bogged down is because of info dumping. So I would recommend that you be really logical with this. Figure out what you want to reveal. Like say it's the backstory and you just are gonna, you know, you want to reveal the backstory and it's relevant to what the character is going to choose in the climactic moment, so the reader needs to know this. Okay, great. So take what you need to reveal and be very logical about it. Lay it out on your paper, divide it into chunks, and say, okay, every 2 or 3 chapters, I'm going to reveal a chunk of this. And then, of course, you can look at your chapters and line it up with what's happening in each chapter, so you're not just throwing it in there somewhere, but it'll just give you an idea of how to reveal it a little bit over time. And then by doing that, you can line it up with what's happening in the plot, and that becomes a more natural way to reveal it as well, because they will be linked, right? So that's another way to keep from slowing down your book too much. Don't info dump. And this is true on many levels. Even if you're having, let's say that it's not like an info dump that you're revealing for the end of the book. Maybe it's just what a character believes about a particular concept that's being revealed in a certain chapter, right? So all of it has to go in this chapter. But people will still write like 1 or 2 big paragraphs showing what the character believes. Don't do that. That's still an info dump. It might be like a mini info dump, but it's still an info dump. Take that and reveal a line or 2 with each line of dialogue or with each event that happens in the chapter, so that you're revealing it over time. That's what I'm trying to get you to, okay? The opposite of an info dump is revealing over time. And the info dump will kill your pacing. Revealing over time is what makes things flow and be smooth and keep moving it along at a good gait, okay? So don't info dump, reveal over time. That's the second hack. The third hack is my favorite hack, which is emotion, right? So we're going to talk about description here, but there's 2 different types of description we're going to talk about. The first is describing what a character is doing, right? So it could be their body language, how they're standing, the way they're moving, or they could be actually moving around doing something, driving a car, cleaning up a room, you know, whatever it is. So we're kind of describing the motion, the actions that they're taking, right? The hack here is to always link description to how they feel about something, all right, or what they're thinking. So it kind of goes along with, you can mix it in with dialogue and not just using the same old dialogue tags, but using dialogue with action. It's kind of the same thing here. Action, again, remember what I said, action does create adrenaline. So even if it's not like really heavy, being chased by a bad guy or car chase or battle scene, even just movement is a form of action. And because it's not as huge, high action, you know, that creates as much adrenaline, but it's still going to create very low level emotions, very low level adrenaline. So just telling us something is not creating any action. But if you tie it to one of the character's actions, then it becomes more emotional, okay? So just when you're doing a description of the character, make sure you tie everything to either how they feel about something or what they think about it. Thoughts are another big one. We want to make sure that we are always telling the audience, the readers, what a character feels about something. So just imagine this for a minute. Let's say that you have a character who is outside in nature somewhere, and they've gotten themselves into trouble. Doesn't really matter how, but they are looking for help, right? And they make it out to the highway. Say it's a young man. He makes it out to the highway, and he's hoping to flag down a car, but he walks for a long, long time. And then finally, in the distance, he sees headlights, and, there's a car coming. Now, just telling us that, the fact that we've, been following his whole story, the readers will feel some form of relief, right? Oh, good, there's a car, and he's going to be able to be helped. But just telling us that there's a car coming, contrast that with something like, then he saw headlights in the distance. Oh, thank heaven, he thought, now I'm going to be able to get help, and when we get his thoughts about it and his feelings and his relief and his everything that he is experiencing, it's really about the experience more than anything else. It creates so much more emotion in us. And once again, if you can create that emotion, your pace is not going to drag. Okay, so all I'm saying is that when it comes to actually writing your scenes, if it feels like the sentences are dragging, because I've even had people say, well, I've got a lot going on in the scene. It's not that there's nothing going on, but it still feels like it's dragging. Well, that could be passive voice. That's part of the problem there, which is a whole other thing. But it also could be that you're just not getting enough emotion in your description, right? Tell us what the character is thinking and what they are feeling, and that just instantly picks up the pacing, excuse me. All right, so make sure that you are tying everything you're describing about a scene or about a character or about an action to the emotions that they're feeling or the thoughts they are thinking. Okay, that will pick up your pacing. And finally, let's talk about classic description when you are just describing what you can observe with the five senses, like describing what a character looks like, or describing the room they just walked into, or what the countryside they're driving through looks like, that sort of thing. Remember that the five sensory experience actually does evoke emotion as well. And this is another thing that a lot of people don't think that this is an emotional thing. They differentiate between the five senses and the emotions, but they really shouldn't. It's a different kind of emotion, right? It's not the same thing as, being so emotional that you're jumping up and down with excitement or, weeping in your dinner or something like that. Obviously, it's a lower level emotion than that. But because we are human beings, every moment that we are alive, we are attaching emotions to something. In fact, the only way we can pull up memories is if there is an emotion attached to it. So when we all have things where, like, someone will say, where were you when you found out about 9/11? And everybody remembers where they were. It's because those were very heightened emotions. So of course we remember that. Now, for more mundane experiences, we may not remember the details of the memory around something. Like the first time we ever bit into a lemon, for example, we may not remember exactly what was going on or why we bit into the lemon or how old we were or what house we lived in or anything like that. But because it's more of a neutral memory, we don't have really heightened emotions attached to it. But even if we're just feeling pretty neutral about it, that's still an emotion. That's still how we are feeling at the time. And if we don't have an emotion, we could not call up the memory of biting into a lemon. We can, just the actual lemon part, because we've experienced it before and we have some sort of emotion tied to that. So my point is, the reason that we want to show rather than tell is because when we evoke the five sensory experience, that is actually creating a low level of emotion for your reader. So when it comes to description, if you feel like you're describing things and it's bogging your story down, make sure you get the five senses in there. And then there's relevant details. People always say, how much is too much? How much description is too much? What should we be describing? What should we be leaving alone? It is a complicated question, and I'm probably going to go into it in more detail in a later podcast. But what I will say is that it needs to create the five sensory experience, but it also needs to be relevant. So I think most of us know that we shouldn't describe something to death, right? Let me give you an example as a jumping off point. Let's say that you have a young man, a teenage boy is coming home from football practice, and it's dinner time and he's starving because he's been at football practice. And he walks in the door and he immediately smells dinner. Now, you can say that he smelled garlic and onions as part of dinner. And even that in and of itself will evoke some emotion in the reader because most people have walked into a room that smells like garlic and onions. And when you're hungry, it smells really good. So all of us have had that experience. So just telling us that will create kind of a sensory experience for the reader. But it's so much more effective to have this boy walk in and say something like, The heavy scent of garlic and onion filled his nose, and his stomach rumbled. He was so hungry. He looked to the right and saw that the table was set for dinner, and he was so excited to eat what his mom had made. From a back bedroom, his mother yelled at him to clean up because dinner was in 5 minutes. You see how I just pulled in most of the 5 senses there. He heard his mother calling, he saw the table, he smelled the smell. I didn't do taste. I did how he felt because his stomach was rumbling. But, you know, you kind of taste garlic and onions when you smell them. So I could work that in somehow. But it's not about describing all the things about a single detail. I didn't even say, in this case, what the table looked like. I could talk about the plates and the napkins and how well is it set, or is it just like a stack of plates in the middle of the table? I could do that if I wanted to, and it would definitely create more of an image. But in this case, I'm looking to just give the reader the experience this young man had as he walked in. And the 5 senses don't have to be about one thing. They don't have to be about the shirt he was wearing, or even what the table looked like, or what the kitchen looked like. It's just the 5 senses experience that he had all around. Now, you certainly can put in some of those other details, but you don't want to, you know, for example, describe the table in 3 paragraphs, every single little minute detail of it. You don't need that. You can have one image, one punchy image, and it will do its job to create that image in the reader's mind, and that's really all you need. So, I mean, there's not like a maximum or minimum word count for describing something. But like I said, just get the 5 sensory experience in there, and usually 1 or 2 punchy details is all you really need. So if I wanted to do the table thing, I might say something like, and I kind of already did it. I might say, instead of just that the table was set for dinner, I could either, if it was set really well because it was like fine china and that sort of thing, then maybe it would be more important to describe that. But given, you know, the scene that I've created here, it just sounds like a suburban family at home having dinner. So it might just be like, there was a stack of plates in the middle of the table next to a salad. And obviously, you know, his mom had put that there in preparation for dinner. And that alone creates an image in your mind that's going to be more than enough. And unless it's really, really, really important for us to know exactly what is on the table, and that's really relevant for the story, you don't need more than that. Relevance is a big thing. I mean, relevance comes in 2 ways. It's either what is relevant for the story, so we need to know that because of something that's going on down the line in the story, or it's relevant because it's creating the 5 sensory experience. But like I said, with that, you really only need 1 or 2 punchy details. So when it comes to description, just take both of those things in mind. If you're just trying to create a visual for the reader, 1 or 2 punchy details. If you're wondering whether you should put this in, ask yourself, does the reader need to know that? Is it going to be important down the line in the story? If yes, put it in. If no, leave it out. The exact color of the dinner napkins and how many there were, and the fact that there were I don't know, geese on the tablecloth pattern, none of that is really, really important. I can throw it in like a little detail here or there in order to create that visual, but I don't need to go on and on and on about it, right? So beyond that, it is going to be really up to you. There's not, like I said, there's not some really hard and fast rule set up for this, right? We just have to figure out what will balance everything, what will give us the 5 sensory experience and create those images, but also keep the story flowing. Another, this is not really a pacing hack, but another really good thing that I would encourage you to do is get eyes on your story. Especially when you're starting out, critique groups, especially with other authors, are invaluable because they will be able to tell you from a very subjective standpoint what is working and what is not. They will be able to say, okay, you've got too many details about the kitchen table. Unless we need to know that, you need to cut that down. Or the opposite, they'll say, okay, well, we came in and we smelled the garlic, but we have no idea what his home looks like. What did he see when he walked in? You know, because you didn't put that in there. And once you start doing that and getting that feedback and then incorporating that into your writing, really quickly, you're going to learn to do that on your own. It's a really great teaching tool. And I've seen so many people who have gone into critique groups or come into my own critique group that have just improved by leaps and bounds by doing that week over week. So I would really encourage you to do that too. Okay, anyway, so let's recap just a little bit. Remember that there's really only one way to hook a reader, which is through emotion, although I did talk about action too, because most people default to that. But the only reason that action hooks us is because it creates adrenaline, and that is a form of emotion. So emotion is what you need to hook your readers and to keep your pacing where it needs to be so that it doesn't lag. In terms of scenes, remember that the scene always needs to turn, which means something needs to change for the character and their situation from the beginning of the scene to the end. And also you can use story structure systems, plot points, that sort of thing, to create your scene. You just do them on a micro level, the same as you do to create your novel, okay? When it comes to revealing anything, make sure that you are always revealing piecemeal over time. Do not info dump on any level. And when it comes to description, make sure that when you are describing action or describing body language, that you are always linking that to what the character is thinking or what they are feeling. And when it comes to just describing the way something looks more statically, or giving an experience, make sure you get the 5 senses in there. But also make sure that you're only keeping in relevant details. When it comes to the 5 sensory experience, you really only need 1 or 2 punchy details to create the image in the reader's mind. Don't overdo it, okay? That is all I have for you today. I just had some noise turn on in the background. Sorry about that if my mic's picking that up. So it's a good time to go ahead and wrap up. If you don't have it yet, so specifically in terms of scenes and those story structure plot points, if you have not picked it up yet, make sure and get my 10 universal plot points. It's actually a free mini course. I will link it in the show notes. You get a PDF and then also just like a 1-hour training of me talking about it and explaining it. And that will actually help you a lot because you can use that not only to help build out your novel, and if you make sure that all of those plot points are included, your pacing will automatically be better than if you are not including them, okay? So it's not the end-all be-all of great writing by any means, but it's definitely a first step and it helps. So make sure and grab that if you haven't yet, and then you can also use those same 10 plot points to plot your scenes on a micro level, all right? Let me know what you guys thought about this. Like I said, I'm gonna do a bunch more episodes on pacing, but if there's anything in particular you want me to talk about, please let me know. You can find me at Six Figure Storyteller on Instagram and TikTok. I'm also on Facebook, so you can contact me in many ways, all right? Everyone have a wonderful day. Have fun messing with your pacing. I know it can be frustrating, but it should also be fun while you're figuring it out, okay? So have a wonderful week of writing, and I will be back next week. Bye, guys. Thanks for listening today. If this episode helped or inspired you in any way, would you do me a solid and leave me a review? Reviews help other fiction authors find the podcast. You could also recommend it to a writer friend of yours so they can get the same inspiration you got. Remember, you have a story inside you that only you can tell. So get out there and write your soul story, because your readers are waiting for it with bated breath.